The following week is when Mr. DeAngelis comes. He will be speaking actually in your class. I wanted to give him as much time as possible, so you'll get to hear him hear him live here on hopefully, Lord willing, the 23rd. So 30. So and then after that, the week after that, we're going to be talking a little bit about helping the helpers, and that's really the last week, full week that we've got. We only meet once during finals week. Your final project is your final, so it's due on the 28th. And assuming that we'll get everything covered and everything that week, then that last Tuesday we meet will be really just a reflection and looking back and Q&A and anything else that we want to insert in there we can to use the rest of the time. Yeah.
So are we meeting during the finals week?
Probably not. I probably, assuming that we do all of our debriefing on Tuesday, then there's no reason to really meet during finals week. You've got plenty to do, and I do too. So, so that's kind of what we've got mapped out for the rest of the time, rest of the semester. So, the other thing that I need to mention, I've been forgetting about this, is you guys that are seniors that are graduating. We have an event coming up in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences called the Baccalaureate. And the nice thing about the Baccalaureate is, one, it's free, and two, if you have any hope at all at connecting with any of your professors and your family in tow, Baccalaureate is probably the place to do it. So if you want information about it, you can go to the web address is ccushss.org, and that will take you to our website. This is the last year I'm doing it. I've been doing this for 7 years, so I'm foisting it off on other people next year. But I'm asking for a couple of things of seniors that are coming. One is if you'd be kind enough to submit any photos you have of your years here at CCU. So I'm going to be putting together a retrospective video with those photos, and I need as many as I possibly can get my hands on. So I asked for 3 or 4 if you have them. You just send them to my email address. It's all in that letter. I think you guys got a letter, an email from me. Thank you, Gabe. At least some. If you didn't, it's in your junk mail. So justifiably. So so there's that. The other thing on the website specifically that I want to orient you to is if you're coming, one of the big projects on the horizon that I'm going to be working on is I've asked seniors to provide us with a one-liner memory. And you can be no holds barred. I'll have to edit out the expletives if there's anything like that, but because I'm going to put a compendium of those together in the program to make it be something that you want to hang on to. So there's a link on the website that takes you to the place where you just submit those one-liner memories, but about the same as a tweet, 140 characters or whatever, real short and succinct, and then I gather them all together and put together a program for the event. Originally, in most universities, baccalaureates were considered the worship service for the graduation ceremony in most universities. Of course, since we're in a Christian one, then the graduation ceremony ends up being kind of like a worship service too. So the baccalaureate is a little bit different. We will have a real brief time of the more traditionalists on the committee asked for a hymn. I just want to throw up. So I said I'd rather have a praise song, and they wanted to throw up because it's just to them all repetition. It's like, you're too old, get over yourself. So we split the difference, and then after that, We have some student speakers that will be speaking, and a scripture reading, and then Dr. Hartwig will harass you for 20 minutes, and then it'll be over. And it's free food. It can't be. How bad can it be? So, so over the last few years, we've had it at the Lakewood Cultural Center. Last year was really our biggest attendance. We almost had 300 people there. We're not going to be able to accommodate that because it's down here in the 170, 172. But I would encourage you to come. And most people don't regret coming. Graduation, it's like finding a needle in a haystack when you're trying to find people. And I never know if I'm ever going to see anybody. Once I see, anybody in the baccalaureate, it's a lot easier. It's a smaller group, and you're able to talk to people and whatever else. Senior banquet is just as bad, so, and you pay money for it. So there you go. All right, so that's it. That's the shameless plug. If you're interested in any flyers or anything, there's some up in the outer office by where my office is. And there's a QR code that you can scan to get to the website. It's not that hard, but we need to get a head count. So if you're coming, be sure to register there and let us know that you're coming and everything, so we know if we need to plan for bigger. So, okay, any questions or anything? Yes, it's coming. And in light of that, the end of the semester brings not death, but loss. So,
Nice.
there's always a segue I can find one way or another. This is what we're going to be spending our day on. The one thing that I would say how many of you guys have been in the grief and loss class? Okay, not very many of you. Okay, good. I can impose it on more people. The one thing that I always got feedback on when people would do the grief and loss class is who would want to go through something that depressing. And then by the time the week is over, it's like, this wasn't depressing at all. I thought it was going to be, and it isn't. And some of that has to do with how we see loss and death even. And that's really what I want to spend the time talking about today. And so I kind of lifted some material out of that class to bring to you. It's not, obviously this is not in your book. I've been doing a fair amount of work over the years with folks that are dealing with grief and loss and all the things around that. And that's really what I want to spend some time talking to you guys about. I think it's important that if we're going to come alongside people that are experiencing loss in whatever form, whether a death or broken relationship or other things, changes in family life or whatever, I think we've got to have a reasonable perspective about it first, because if we don't, you'll end up saying something really, 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 really stupid, like a platitude. And while it serves its purpose for us saying it, it serves absolutely no purpose for the person hurting. And that's what I want to kind of sensitize you guys to while we go through this. So with that, let me pray, and then we'll jump into this material. Let's pray. Father, we invite you into our time today. This subject, when we look at it, just seems like something that's just filled with darkness and heartache and all the other things that go along with our sorrow. And the interesting thing, it seems to me, is that Jesus was described as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. And there probably is a few things that are closer to our human experience than loss. And that was one thing that if he wanted to, he could have gone through his entire life without ever experiencing, and yet he experienced it throughout his life. And it gives us a little bit of a clue into your heart for us. As hard as it is to grasp and understand, your desire to be in our world and understand what it's like, including the grief of loss, is incredible. absolutely incredible. So I pray that you'll just guide our time and the stuff that I have to offer and perhaps the discussion that ensues. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so let me give you some background first, okay? I come to this topic with a dog in the fight. Because I say that because when I was a kid, I was 12 years old, my dad died. And he passed away. I was their only kid. And I lived in a fairly traditional family. My dad was a World War II vet. He came home from the war and dutifully went off to work in the steel mill in Northwest Indiana. And I was the adopted kid of two people that were childless. And so that was all the parents I ever knew, and that was all the life I ever knew. And the memories and the things that I had from that time still live with me today. As a matter of fact, there's one thing that I carry around my neck still that I will be buried with, and that's my dad's dog tag. One of my daughters has picked up that memento, and she did what only her generation would do and tattooed herself with it. Just fitting. The one thing I want you to understand when we're talking about this stuff is that I come to understand this not because I did all the research and because I wrote a book about it. I come to this stuff because I made all the mistakes possible with it. The observations and the things that I have to say might seem kind of tinged with some measure of edge to them, more so than usual, because I've experienced a lot of it. And that's why it's one of the few topics that I find myself really very passionate about, because there's a lot about what we do with death and loss that we detach it from life. And by doing that, we empty life of its meaning. If we think we can live life as if we will never die, or anyone in our lives will ever die, we lose something in the process. We don't know that we are. We think that we don't need that kind of heartache. But the reality is that going into it and allowing ourselves to experience it and see it, and not try to package it up and make it look nice and pretty, adds depth to life. And we made a mistake, and I'm going to take you through just a real short walkthrough of history, but we made a mistake at one point when we detached death from life, and it ceased to be continuous with life. And so then when it became something else, it's something that gets in the way. It's something that interrupts. It's something that ruins things. And at one point in time, at least in human history, that was not the case. It was an acceptable part of life, and it was an important part of life for a lot of different reasons, and we'll spend a little time talking about it. So, that being said, I went for a full-bore, pedal to the metal decade of avoiding the subject. I didn't address this subject until I was 22. And I did everything I could to avoid it at all costs in whatever way I could. I grew up through my adolescent years through the 70s, and I had all the cover I needed with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And really it wasn't until just an inkling of a time when I worked at a camp in the summer, and it was kind of the beginning of the end, where I was leading an outdoor survival camp with a 34-foot canoe. Yeah, and it would go from about that step to this step over here. And I had a group of fathers and sons in the trip. And the fathers dutifully sat in the back, and all the sons, because they were a bunch of little squirrely idiots, ran to the front of the canoe. where we went was we crossed the second busiest shipping channel in the United States called the Detour Passage. It's up on the eastern tip of the UP of Michigan. And so we climbed into the canoe, started to try to cross the channel. We had two different iron ore freighters that we had to figure out how to dodge with waves that were somewhere in the vicinity of 20 feet. And I thought for sure we were all going to die. And I thought, well, if I die, then I can't be held liable for what happens. But I thought better of it, and so I fought to keep the canoe going in the right direction, and pretty much by a miracle alone, we got across the passage and landed. The dads, kind of rallied, and they all jumped out of the boat to stabilize the canoe, and the boys were all huddled in the middle, just hoping that they were going to stay alive. And we finally landed, and we got everybody there safe. And as we sat and talked about what happened and processed all that we had been through, I saw something that absolutely tore my heart out, and that was fathers that were loving their sons. And it was really, really tough. And the winds were still howling from down through the passage. And so when everybody kind of broke up, I went walking down the beach and had a full-on cursing, yelling, screaming, everything matched with God over the fact that why was I here without my dad? And like I said, it was kind of the beginning of the change that happened. About 5 or 6 years later, I was in graduate school, and I was one of my fellow students happened to be my pastor of my church, and he looked me in the eye and he said, "Have you ever said goodbye to your dad?" And I was very appropriate in my language then. I wouldn't be now. I'd tell him to go F off and do something else. But I said, no, I don't want to. Why would I have to do something like that? And he said, I think it might be about time because you're being controlled by all the emotions that you have not been dealing with. It's like, do you know something I know? You've been talking to my new wife. She's ratting me out. What's the deal here? And through the process of sitting and talking with him and thinking through exactly all the things that I held against God and my dad and everything in my family, I finally got to this point of finally saying goodbye. And for me, in my process, it was writing a letter to my dad and going to the grave and sitting by the side and saying, look, this is where I'm at, and this is the time where I need to live life, not be caught in life waiting for you to come back. And so I did that. Also did kind of a come to Jesus moment with my mom because I had to set some boundaries that needed to be set, and that was really that was when I began learning about how important grief is and how important loss is. And it wasn't again until probably 10 years later that I finally began to realize that, oh, by the way, not only are you supposed to be a husband, you're supposed to be a dad, and what exactly that looks like, because my dad was the dad, not me. And then a few years later, I was asked to write a book about childhood development, and the author, the acquisitions editor for the publisher said, oh, by the way, we're looking for somebody to write a book about grief. Would you be interested? I thought, sure, why not? I'm on a roll, written 3 already, why not do a couple more? And literally, all of the books I have ever written outside of this book are gone in the dust heap of history. This book was written in 1993. And at last count, we were at 450,000 copies sold last year. And I'm not saying I know how that could ever happen. I really don't. Except that there's a lot in that book that you guys get to taste all the time. me standing up here and ranting or musing or whatever it is you call it, what I do. So that book is still going. I don't know how, but it's really pretty amazing. I'm shocked that it's been in at least 15 different countries, and missionaries have been carrying it with them. I just had an email not too long ago from somebody in Brazil that was asking that I get it translated into Portuguese, and I have no power over that, so it's like, call my publisher. So that's a long, arduous journey that my hope is to give my students at least a window on to the importance of what we're talking about here. There's a lot that we talk about in this class, really, really important, all semester. Things that happen to people. And some people would say, well, loss or death, that happens to people. Yeah, it does. And perspective is everything. It always is. It doesn't solve everything, but it is pretty important. So when we talk about this and look at this, the question that usually comes up is, why is this so important to talk about? And one of the first things is where we have gotten today, at least in our society, is we don't accept death as a reality. Now, when I say that, you say, well, no, that's not true. I mean, in a factual, intellectual assent, accept that death is a reality. But what does it mean for us to accept it as it is? And so we don't accept death as a reality, and we also see death, like I said in my prelude, we also see death as an enemy. And in many ways, it is, in a sense, because it takes somebody from us. That's kind of how we see it. It steals them from us. The thing that I don't want you to miss, and I've said this in other contexts, but our lives are punctuated by contrasts. And happiness can't really be fully experienced because if it has no comparison point. So when we experience sadness, we hate it. Of course, we hate it. But sadness adds a depth to happiness that we wouldn't otherwise have. Same thing is true for joy and sorrow, or any of the other contrasts that we have. Peace versus war. All of those things have meaning because there is a contrast. So we see it as an enemy, and it is. In a variety of levels it is. But at another level, maybe it isn't. Because it anchors sorrow for us and then adds a depth to joy that we wouldn't otherwise know. And that's happening. Even in our culture today, we want to get rid of everything bad. We don't want any discomfort. We don't want to feel anything that would make us feel whatever bad. But we forget about the fact is that we shut one down, we shut the other down. Because the joy that I experience when I'm sitting out on my back porch with my grandsons is fuller because I don't have it. My dad didn't get to have that. And so it doesn't compute in our modern minds. It really doesn't. So the other one is we've never been taught how to grieve. If anybody's ever read my book, in the introduction, I out my mother-in-law. She wasn't my mother-in-law at the time. I was only 12, so I wasn't married. You're so relieved, right? But I was staying at my wife's home when my mom walked in to say that my dad had died. Because her brother and me were good friends, that was a natural place for me to stay. And so my mom went back and to do all the necessary logistics and things around getting a funeral together and everything else. And I stayed there. And when it was time for people to start coming in and visiting and doing all the things that they do, Pat and Paul, now my in-laws, I got in the car and they drove me home. And one of the most vivid memories I have, which was entirely unique, was Pat sitting in the front seat looking over her shoulder at me and saying, "This is what you do when people offer their condolences." I'd never heard the word before. This is what you do when people say they're sorry your dad's died. This is how you accept those things. We're even today, we are not taught how to grieve. We have no models other than extreme models or caricatures of people that are grieving. And so because of that, then we just simply shut the whole thing down. And that still, it prevents us from really learning anything. And in my case, in a lot of people's case, we've never experienced grief before. It has no predecessor. We don't, what do you do when you feel as numb as you do? Well, how do you do that? And even worse, how do you live life when suddenly the feelings all come back? At the front end, denial and grief is oftentimes the greatest gift God can give us, because we will never survive all the things that come at us the moment after somebody has died or there's some loss or anything like that. We just won't survive. And so denial is probably the greatest gift we have, to make it so that when it comes awake again, I'm better prepared to be able to handle it. And that's an important part of that. So with all this in mind, I want to show you kind of three views, if you will. The first two come from the same movie. It's a movie called Get Low. Not very many people saw this movie. It would probably be in the list of movies that lost a lot of money. But it has very notable people in it. Two of the most notable is Robert Duvall and Bill Murray, which were kind of the headliners for it. But it's Murray in a very different role than you've ever seen him in before. But it's telling an interesting story of somebody that was referred to as the Hermit of Caleb County. His name was Felix Bush. He had done something that he couldn't forgive himself for. He exiled himself to his property and never came out for 40 years. And when he was nearing the end of his life, he decided that it was time for him to have what he called a funeral party. And instead of a funeral service, he wanted everybody to come to tell stories about him to him when he was still alive. Because his way of thinking was, if you don't have the guts enough to say anything when I'm still alive, then why bother when I'm dead? So what you see in the first scene is him approaching the mortuary of the funeral home looking for what they have to offer, all right, and what his terms are to do this thing. The second scene you will see is the actual party. Now, this is true. This is not fictional. This happened in Tennessee. And it actually happened, and people came from about 4 different counties to tell stories about Felix Bush. Okay? And he was, I mean, imagine somebody that lives back in the woods as a hermit, you know nothing about it, and the townsfolk always talk. There's always rumors about, this crazy man out in the woods and killing kids and burying them and eating them alive and all that kind of crap. And that's the kind of thing that he just said, I dare you. And in order to incentivize people to come, he actually started a raffle so that when he died, whoever won the raffle got his property. That's incentive. I love that. 40 years. It was 120 acres of untouched wood. Untouched. And so it's a humorous story. It's got some hugely powerful lessons in it. And the second scene you will see is the party actually happening. And who talks is somebody you really don't expect to see talking. But the thing I want you to tune into, and the reason I kind of bookend the movie is so you can kind of see why Felix says what he says at the very end. Because a lot of times people that have done something that has led or contributed to somebody else's death do exactly what Felix does. And he has a reason for it, and he explains it. So That's that. And then the third one is a clip out of Shadowlands and is a view of C.S. Lewis. We think of C.S. Lewis as the giant of our faith and apologist and so forth, and this is a very different look at C.S. Lewis. He fell in love with a woman by the name of Joy Gresham. He only knew her 3 years, only 3 years. It changed him forever. Changed C.S. Lewis forever. Even his theology, if you will, about pain and suffering was changed because of the impact that Joy had on his life. Later in life, her son, Douglas Gresham, was the senior or executive producer for all the Narnia films. In the final scene in the movie, and I love watching this movie because of not only the historical part of it, but this kind of real life look at it. But at the very end of the movie, after, no, I'm not going to tell you. I'll tell you after. I wasn't trying to set you up, but I did, and it worked. So here's the first scene from Get Low.
Solid pecan. Steel handles. Forget the box, whatever. Whatever you want. Flowers, burial plot, got it. A service. Party. A what? A party.
What kind of party?
A funeral party.
All right.
We can do that. And I'm gonna be there. You will be, I guarantee. I'm gonna be there now.
You want to be at your funeral party alive? But you can't have a funeral if you're not, deceased.
Hold on now. It's a detail. We can look at it. Pretty big detail. You want to have a funeral party while you're alive so you can go.
Yes or no?
Yes. Buddy, get some paper. We need to make a list of who Mr. Bush wants to invite.
Well, sit down there. I want everybody to come who's got a story to tell about me.
Or say again?
Probably covers about 4 counties. Then I want 4 counties worth of people at the party.
Okay. And now for the party.
I'm Reverend Charlie Jackson. We like to imagine that good and bad, right and wrong are miles apart. But the truth is, very often they're all tangled up with each other. Some 40 years ago, Felix dropped into my life. And then he dropped out. In between, he built the most beautiful sanctuary that I've ever seen. A lot of wonderful things happened in that church.
Charlie, thank you, Charlie. Thank you very much. Good man, Charlie. Thank you. Yeah. I had to go clear to Illinois to find somebody who had anything good to say about me. So, now, I'm not a smart man or a wise one. I don't know what kind of man I am. I was always restless. I thought I'd see the world. But I didn't go nowhere on purpose because I did something I was ashamed of, something I could never fix. Y'all probably think you know what you do or what you wouldn't, and I wish you good luck with that, I really do. When I told Charlie what I'd done, he told me to confess to God, the law, and to somebody else, so as I could get forgiveness. But I didn't want forgiveness. I needed to hold on to what I did, to be sick from it every day of my life, so that I never told nobody else. You see, nobody.
And the interesting thing about that is that a lot of people do exactly the same thing. They impose upon themselves the punishment they believe they deserve. And they exile themselves to their heart, never to come out. Because that's what they believe they deserve. And so it's a self-punishment. The pastor, what you don't know about that is that literally Felix left town, went to this black church in Illinois, this is in the 30s, and literally built a sanctuary for them of the finest woodsmanship, craftsmanship that you could ever imagine. And the story is told in here of all of his efforts to punish himself for what he did. And I'm not going to tell you what it is. If you want to get the movie, go see it. But it's got a great story in it. It's a sad story, but it's a story that a lot of us can relate to because of whatever level of responsibility we oftentimes think we have, okay? So, let's move on now for C.S. Lewis. And this is a scene from Shadowlands. I don't know how much you guys know of his story with Joy. He was an avowed bachelor. Avowed bachelor. He lived with his brother, Warren Lewis, who was probably an alcoholic. And then some woman just drops into his life because she's read his books, and her son loves Chronicles of Narnia, and the minute he meets C.S. Lewis and his brother, he races into the house and goes looking for a wardrobe. The funny thing about it was, Lewis did have a wardrobe. It was up in the attic collecting dust. But Douglas kind of pushed on his mom to finally come, and she came and found herself there and treated with kindness and everything else, and had an abusive alcoholic husband back in the States, decided to stay and proposed to C.S. Lewis. Yeah, marry me so I can stay here. And Lewis said, well, that sounds like a logical explanation. And he did. He married her. And then he fell in love with her. There were few people, I think, and Lewis writes a little bit about this, there are few people who had the wit and the tenacity that Joy Grisham did. And that absolutely enraptured C.S. Lewis. So what you're going to see here is a scene that Joy dies of bone cancer. She was diagnosed, had radiation at that time, and went into remission, and they decide that they're going to do their honeymoon finally. And Lewis had a picture on his wall of this valley in and around the area where he grew up, and they said, let's go there, and this is the scene, okay? And you get a little bit of a glimpse of why C.S. Lewis was so affected by this lady. It's very well portrayed, and forever after this movie and me watching it, this is my only picture of C.S. Lewis. This is Anthony Hopkins does a masterful job, but the scene is really very profound because of the very things that we're talking about in here. Okay, here we go. Yeah, our lamp is very dim, so if you want to watch back there, it's probably easier to see.
No, I don't want to be somewhere else anymore. Not waiting for anything new to happen. Not looking around the next corner or the next hill. Here now. That's enough.
That's your kind of happy, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
It's not going to last, Jack.
You shouldn't think about that now. That's not spoiled content.
It doesn't spoil it. It makes it real. Let me just say it before this rain stops and we go back.
What is there to say?
That I'm going to die. And I want to be with you then too. The only way I can do that is if I'm able to talk to you about it now.
I'm managed somehow. Don't worry about me.
No, I think it can be better than that. I think it can be better than just managing. What I'm trying to say is that the pain then is part of the happiness now. That's the deal.
Nothing like a honeymoon. The profound picture at the end of this movie was after Joy has died and he's left with Douglas. All right, so remember, this isn't a vowed bachelor and now he's a dad. The little boy, and they're walking home. One of the last scenes is the walking home, and Warren says, "Just talk to him." And C.S. Lewis said, "Well, I don't know what to say." And he said, "I don't care whether you know what to say, just talk to him." And so when they go home, C.S. Lewis climbs the stairs to the attic, and of course, Douglas was sitting in front of the wardrobe. And Lewis meets him there. And he meets him not with theology about pain and suffering. He meets him with his own story of loss and losing his mom. And it's a profound scene. It really is. And then it cuts to them walking, and C.S. Lewis is kind of narrating over at the end, and he says, "The boy chose safety, but the man chose intimacy." And, you know, what else is there to say, right? I think when we get hurt, we just want to be safe and not feel any of this stuff. And we choose that over the things that are inviting us to be known in ways that we never really thought about at all. And Douglas Gresham, of course, goes on to have a very illustrious career. He finished a lot, not finished, but he was responsible for publishing the posthumous journals of Lewis about his loss with Joy, called A Grief Observed. And it starts this way. And this, in my mind, when I first read this book and read this, I thought, somehow this doesn't fit with my notion of C.S. Lewis. Because it says this: "Meanwhile, where is God?" Right. This is a theologian that wrote Mere Christianity, did the debates on BBC. This is one of the most disquieting symptoms when you are happy, so happy that you're tempted to feel his claims upon you as an interruption, and you remember you remember yourself and turn to him with gratitude and praise, and you will be, or so it feels, welcomed with open arms. That's that scene. Happy, so happy that you're tempted to think his claims are an interruption. But go to him when your need is desperate, when all other help is vain. And what do you find? A door slammed in your face and a sound of bolting and double bolting on the inside. After that, silence. You might as well turn away. The longer you wait, the more emphatic the silence will become. That's straight out of C.S. Lewis's heart. That's unvarnished Lewis. Because it brought him to a very different place of understanding about the importance of what Joy said. She said, the pain now, or the joy now, is part of the pain then. And that's the deal. Which brings even more kind of clarity to our vision when Jesus is described as a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. What I was praying, I've been thinking about this all day as I've been thinking about talking to you guys about this. And you know what? Jesus' life was punctuated with death. The best we understand, his dad died. Left his mom with him and his brothers. Besides the fact that he was an ostracized kid in the community because nobody knew who his dad was anyway. And then he takes up with Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus and stays at their home repeatedly, so much so that people say their home is his home in Capernaum. And then he dies. And the one thing that gives us a picture into God's heart is the shortest verse in the Bible. Did Jesus know he was going to heal him? Yeah, I think pretty clearly. But he touched something that was so human in losing his friend. And he didn't do the stiff upper lip. He didn't do any of that because he knew. No, he let himself feel that. And when you look at the scriptures and the description, it's not like what I was just doing a minute ago. It wasn't that. It was an emotional explosion. When it says he wept, it's a level that we can't imagine. And that's the Jesus we walk with. So there's a variety of common misconceptions I want to blow up. And the ones I want to look at are these. The first one is, whatever it was that you were feeling when I was trying to talk and my voice started cracking with emotion, whatever started welling up in you is embedded in us from a socialization point of view about restrain yourself. That is important to do. The funny thing about it is, you got to answer the question, why? Because the answer to that question is, so nobody else feels bad. So suddenly the griever is responsible for the people that are coming to comfort them. So we've got very much of a mistaken value of restraint. We think that that's a value at all. Because when we watch somebody starting to have the emotions that they have, or tears start welling up in their eyes, or start tumbling down their cheeks, silently or otherwise, when we're away from them, we say, well, so-and-so, they just fell apart. And I guess my contention to you is maybe they didn't fall apart. Actually, they were probably putting some pieces together. But it comes from that. We're afraid, and this is where shame comes in, is if we show emotions, we are falling apart, melting down, can't keep our crap together, whatever words or phrases you want to come up with, and it's tinged with this shame of being human. When we lose things, we feel pain. Heaven forbid we show it. The other misconception here is that if I let all this stuff out, I will never survive. Some of that is because of the people that might be watching and what they might conclude. Some of that might be because it feels that catastrophic that I'm just unraveling before my very eyes. But again, it's catastrophic. It's a fear. The experiences and the feelings and the things that go with grief rise and fall like all other emotions. They peak in intensity and they begin to wane. It doesn't feel like that in the moment that you're in it. And that's what contributes to the restraint. Because if I don't hold it all together, I won't ever be able to hold it all together. And the last one is the one you've heard me talk about before. And the one thing you noticed, maybe you did, maybe you didn't, because I was feeling it at that moment, because it takes me back to the times of my own grieving. And it's not like I haven't grieved or I'm not finished. But there's a connectedness around sorrow that connects all of us in a lot of ways. But if any tears were going to come down my cheeks, you can be absolutely assured I would never say I'm sorry to you. I won't. Because tears in that sense mean and are symbolic of the love that I have. And so what am I going to do? I'm going to apologize for the fact that I love my dad enough to hurt with somebody else who's hurting? There's something really upside down about that. And it was really kind of quite humorous to me because, you know, if you remember at the very beginning of this year, we had that ridiculous promotion chapel, and the video was shown of my career or whatever they wanted to call it. And they punctuated it with one thing in that, and it was kind of funny because Todd Sloan, the guy that did the videographer that was doing all this kind of creation, is I never said anything to him, and it was almost a side comment when I said, I will never apologize for my tears. And I thought, it's a throwaway phrase, and lo and behold, he built it all around that phrase. And I'm glad. I am elated that my family and my children got to see that video and hear me say that. Because, you know, I've had lots of instances of it since. When I married my daughter and looked over her shoulder and saw her daughter watching, her adopted daughter watching, I was a puddle, which was fine. I was having a fine time swimming. Thank you very much. Some other ones. If we truly love someone, we will never finish with our grief. This couldn't be more untrue. Keeping ourselves static, keeping ourselves a little bit like Felix Bush to say, you know, the only way for me to honor the life of this person that's gone is for me to not go on living. And somehow, most of the time, we will not finish our grief because we want to know someone else's people, other people, to know that I'm grieving. It's funny, and like I said, we're going to be looking at this when we move on to the next part here, but it's fascinating to me that in times gone by, when people were not as intimidated by death, it was a normal occurrence, they went out of their way to protect the people that were grieving. They would either put a black armband on them, you know, they would do a variety of things as far as kind of the traditions of the community. And whenever people saw that person, they would handle with care. They would. And today we have nothing of the sort. You know, companies, bereavement, 7 a week tops. Now, I'm not busting them for that because the odds of getting sick are far greater than the odds of losing somebody. But at the same time, you go back to work and you're supposed to just, what? Just go on with life? You know, people are distracted and they have poor concentration and memory problems, all sorts of things. And it's all grief. But we don't see it that way. So, I mean, the really very, very ironic thing is about the only place in our society where the memory of somebody is commemorated is in sports. Look at the football helmets on the Chicago Bears, for example. They still have a sticker on there, and George Halas died a long time ago, but there's a GH on their helmet. Or basketball teams or other teams, they have a little black band on their uniform. And instantaneously, it's almost written into us. We understand that they're commemorating something with that black band. We all know that. It's kind of built into our consciousness. But heaven forbid we do that with each other. So, grief can be finished. Obviously, that's a misconception. Grief can be healed from. It does not mean the memories go away. It doesn't mean that. You were never designed for memories to go away. You can't learn without memory. There's your psychology for the day. Now, let me give you an example, okay? When I was knee-high to grass-high. No, when I was second grade, I was playing with a bunch of little friends that I was out with, and we were playing around in this sunroom, and the sunroom was all glassed in. And they decided to play some kind of game that would lock people out of the sunroom, and I happened to be the short straw. And being the stubborn little cuss that I was, I said, oh yeah, you're going to lock me out, watch me, and I'm going to play Superman and go right through the glass. I got in. My finger didn't fare very well. I shredded the inside of my finger with glass. And so I'm whisked off to the hospital, and the hand surgeon comes in and says, you know, given how old he is, if we suture up that finger, he will never use it again. And so my mom said, all right, we got to find some other options. Finds a skin surgeon that works on hands, and basically said, I can save that finger. I can do a skin graft. And so my mom was all in, say, yep, do it. And so essentially he took a flap of skin from the interior of my elbow and put it on my finger. And my kids have rued the day that I have a finger that works. But I also am one of the very few people that you will ever meet that has hair growing outside of the side of my finger, because it's from my elbow. My wife gets really irritated when we hold hands. Yeah, it's a great image, isn't it? It's like, you know, this is really bad. Can I just pluck it? And I said, over my dead body, you're going to pluck it. Because it is the most sensitive skin on my body. It is the most sensitive skin, and it's still there. You can see it very clearly. But, okay, now I am many, many, many years beyond that. But I can look at this finger and I can think back and I remember every detail I described to you. I can describe the sunroom. I can describe what this looked like when we were going to the hospital. I can describe even the after effects of the surgery. All of it. And all the medication I had to keep on my finger to keep it moist. All of that stuff. I remember all of it. You see what the point is? It's healed. It works really well. But every time I look at it, I remember. But it's healed. And that's what grief is like. We have the markings of people on our lives. And removing those markings are not the way to remove the memories. The memories are the precious part of it. So the last thing is self-neglect being a part of grief. My mom was a walking poster child for that. She was sure her life had ended and all that she had was this single boy to have to raise. And she went for a long time. She was in stasis a long time. She refused to really let go of my dad. We had a closet in my house that still had all of his Marine uniforms in mothball, so they wouldn't be ruined. Unfortunately, she had a fire, and that was the end of them. But self-neglect generally is for others. It's for others. It's for them to know how much grief I'm feeling. And that's usually where the problem a lot of times comes in. So trying to understand this topic and to move into authentic grief without it being on display, but still authentically experienced, is the key to life. It's the key to life. It's not the key to death. It's the key to things of relationships and the depth of relationships that come from the heartache that comes out of that grief. Now, I'm not saying we stand in line to do this stuff or to go through this kind of stuff at all. No, of course not. But we do try to do everything we can to engage it in a way that we can allow it to heal. Now, let me end with one last story, and then we'll take a break and then get into history and really put you to sleep. And that is that one of the things that happened, I don't know, 40 years ago, 50 years ago now, is that when people had a really terrible bad burn, skin burn, the only way, and I write about this in my book, the only way that the medical community at the time could help them heal was every morning they would get them up. They would give them a massive dose of Demerol, which is a huge analgesic, plunge them into a whirlpool, and scrub their wounds. Because scabs are the greatest enemy to somebody that's healing from burns. Scab over, right? You cut your finger, you hurt yourself, you get a scab. What happens underneath the scab? The skin works its way back together, heals itself, scab falls off, heals, skin's good. What is a burn victim missing? Skin. So what forms under the scabs is the kind of bacteria that would literally kill them. And so the only thing they could do is to scrub the wounds and keep them fresh so that the body could begin to reconstruct itself from the inside out. There's a lot of metaphor here, folks. Because we tend to cover over, and poison forms underneath the cover, and we end up poisoning ourselves in our effort to try to recover from the psychological burn wound of grief. And a lot of writers write about it that way. They say the physical burn wound is one thing, but psychological burn wound is something very different. And that's how they describe grief, as a psychological burn wound. And it occurs to me that a lot of times people will say, leave it alone, ignore it, but then they're drinking in the poison that's building up under holding all of those emotions in. And that's the backdrop to a lot of these misconceptions we have. So, okay, I'll give you a break. We'll stop. See you back here about quarter after, and we'll run through a few other things a little faster.